All right. So coming back here, very good morning to all of you. Again, thank you very much. Let me make Jin as so that he can share his. Can you share the slide, Jin? Can you try that? Is it possible?
Yeah, I think it's okay.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay, good. All right. So I again, I think Dr. Jin just now have briefly explained or briefly introduced himself. He's actually holding a very very important post, the Vice President of Research and Extension for the City College of Angeles at the Angeles City in the Philippines, the President of the Pampanga Research Educators Organization, which actually I was invited to become one of their speakers for their conference. Actually, I was very honored to be invited as so they organize a lot of conferences and a lot of research enhancement workshop. I would use that word. And the president of Association of Local College and Universities of Region 3 Research Council. So he holds quite an important post in the Philippines. And yeah, I think because of this, because of the movement order control, because of the pandemic, I guess he have keep his hair longer than his picture right now.
Correct,
so
correct. I agree.
he look a little bit different from the picture.
Yeah.
because of the pandemic, I guess you keep the hair, so no time to cut the hair yet. But anyhow, it's good to see you again. So I will leave the floor to you, Dr. Jin. I mean for the lecture, and any question from the floor, I guess anyone would be able to put up in the chat box, especially mine, our class, my class student. This is the opportunity for you. And I think he will show you, I think you tell me the other day, you will show us the one statistical program, right? Right? Is it true?
Yeah, actually, the one that I usually use for PLS path modeling is WARP PLS. Okay, so basically most of my published papers utilize that software.
All right. So
okay.
No problem. So the floor is yours. I will give the floor to you. You have you can present your stuff, and then after that, perhaps you have some question and answer session. Thank you very much, Dr. Jin.
Okay, so again, thank you very much, Dr. Ivan Lau, for the invitation. It is a great pleasure to be your guest lecturer this morning, and I will be giving a talk on business marketing and tourism studies, quantitative approach, and PLS path modeling. So in this presentation, I will just be giving you some ideas about quantitative approach, particularly those that are under path modeling techniques. And I will also be sharing some of my published papers that utilize this kind of technique. Okay, so again, good morning, everyone. So in my presentation, I'll try to discuss as much as possible about the second generation statistical tests. We know for a fact that statistics is divided into two. We have the first generation and the second generation statistical tests. Just to have a quick recap, when we talk about first generation statistical tests, we are talking about here, for example, let's say you want to test significant differences. And if your study has something to do with comparative studies, then you tend to employ tests of significant differences, such as, for example, t-test or ANOVA, particularly if your data is parametric or your data is normally distributed. So therefore, parametric are usually more appropriate. Then if, for example, your data is non-normal, then we tend to make use of the non-parametric equivalents such as Mann-Whitney-U, Wilcoxon test, Kruskal-Wallis test, and other non-parametric equivalents of the different tests of significant differences. Then we also have, for example, let's say tests of association, such as, let's say, the use of chi-square, tests of relationships like the use of Pearson-R, Spearman's Rho, and other tests of significant relationships such as bivariate, correlations, canonical correlations, and other things. Then we also have what we call the regression analysis and multivariate analysis, such as linear regression, the logistic regression, and the different multivariate techniques. And of course, we have factor analysis, particularly assuming, let's say, your study has something to do with creating, for example, a new construct, because maybe there are no available measurement for a particular construct, then you can use factor analysis. In factor analysis, if, for example, you're going to come up with a new construct, you start with exploratory factor analysis or EFA, then you simply confirm it using CFA, which is confirmatory factor analysis. Then we also have what we call the second generation statistical tests. I think here in the Philippines and also in Malaysia, this is one of the widely used statistical techniques in quantitative research in business. The use of structural equation modeling. So today we have two major divisions. We have the covariance base or the CBSEM, and we also have the partial least squares or the plssem. And in this presentation, I will be covering more of the more recent one, which is the partial least squares structural equation modeling. Why is this? I think why am I going to focus on this one? I think this plssem is one of the widely used now in terms of a technique, particularly in measuring, for example, a complex model. Number two, partially squares has a lot of developments recently, and it continuously evolving until now. And there are a lot of things that are being addressed now by this technique, which is partially squares structural equation modeling. Okay, so just to give you an idea of the difference between the two, CBSEM and plssem, how do we use these two? Typically, if the goal of the study is basically to predict key constructs, okay, so if your study has something to do predicting key constructs or the key drivers, then we use plssem. If your goal is to test theory, to confirm a theory, or to compare alternative theories, then we usually use CBSEM. If your study is exploratory in nature or an extension of an existing theory, then we usually use plssem. So if you will be looking at this one, this is the main difference of CBSEM and plsm in terms of usage. Okay, but of course, with the recent developments now in plssem, okay, there are a lot of developments now with plssem. For instance, let's say recently, Bentler and Huang in 2014, Dijkstra in 2014, and Dijkstra-Hensler in 2015 introduced the method that provide consistent plssem estimation. They call it as the consistent PLS estimation common factor model, which mimic CBSEM. In short, this technique now can really mimic also the functionality of the CBSEM. So this is one of the developments when we talk about plssem. Okay, and to differentiate the two, okay, so this table summarizes the difference between the two and which approach is appropriate for a particular type of analysis. So for instance, let's say if the objective of the study is more on prediction, then the recommended technique is plssem. If your objective is exploratory, plssem. If it is explanation, it is CBSEM. If it is, for example, explanation and prediction, plssem, and so on and so forth. So you will see this type of analysis will give us the idea of which of the two structural equation modeling approaches is more appropriate, okay, in our study. And if you will be looking different studies on plssem, they provide several reasons why plssem is widely used. Okay, so for example, let's say in the paper of Hare et al. In 2019, they identified the reason why to choose plssem. And based on their paper, they mentioned that if the paper is on the prediction perspective, then plssem is more attuned. Number two, if your model is complex, so it means if you have a lot of variables or constructs in your proposed model or in your conceptual framework, then plssem can be a good tool for us to analyze the interrelationships of the different variables. Number three is, this is one, I think one of the strengths of plssem, it supports both reflective constructs and formative constructs. Okay, so reflective and formative constructs can easily be measured using plssem. This one also, small and large sample sizes are okay with plssem. Of course, we tend to follow sampling estimation or sample size estimation in identifying the right or appropriate sample size every time we perform PLS-SEM technique. Then one of the beauty of PLS-SEM is the distribution. In PLS-SEM, whether your data is normally distributed or it is not normally distributed, then distribution is not an issue with PLS-SEM. Okay, so those are the 5 major reasons, according to here et al., why PLS-SEM is more appropriate. Okay, recently there's also a journal called the Journal of Applied Structural Equation Modeling, which is a journal that only accepts paper on structural equation modeling. I think the presence of this kind of journal is a manifestation that there are a lot of papers now, regardless of whatever field, that applies the technique structural equation modeling. Okay. So for instance, let's say, I'm just going to give you an example. So for example, this paper, which was published in 2019 in Asia Pacific Social Science Review, which is a journal here in the Philippines managed by one of the leading business schools, De La Salle University. So they have a journal, Asia Pacific Social Science Review. So one of my papers is available in that journal, particularly in their 2019 issue. The title of my paper is The Mediating Effect of Employee Engagement on the Relationship of Transformational Leadership and Intention to Quit, Evidence from Local Colleges in Pampanga, Philippines. So if you will be analyzing this, the title itself, it talks about employee engagement, it talks about transformational leadership and intention to quit. And basically the main contents of this paper revolves on the mediating effect or the intervening role of employee engagement on the relationship between transformational leadership and intention to quit. Okay, and if you will be looking at this model, okay, it follow a very simple conceptual framework where each of the arrow is represented by a particular hypothesis, and at the same time the last hypothesis talks about the mediating effect of employee engagement on the relationship between transformational leadership and intention to quit. Okay, of course in PLS-SEM we call that as a mediation analysis. So the main contribution of the study has something to do with the mediating effect or the indirect effect of employee engagement between transformational leadership and intention to quit. And the approach that was utilized in this one is through the use of PLS path modeling. Okay, so another example of a study that was published, I think this one is 2018. This paper was written by of course, by me and of course my co-authors from Indonesia, Dr. Mulyaningsi, and a colleague from Macedonia, Professor Ramadani. So we did the research on the mediating effects of social entrepreneurial antecedents on the relationship between prior experience and social entrepreneurial intents. And our respondents here are basically Filipino and Indonesian university students. So in this paper, which was published in 2018 at the Journal of Science and Technology Policy Management. So if you will be looking at the framework of this paper, this is the framework of the study. So each of the arrow here represent a particular hypothesis, and we measured all the indirect effect of the antecedents on the relationship between prior experience and social entrepreneurial intents. And through the use of PLS path modeling, it is much easier to measure all the direct and indirect effects because, as I mentioned, PLS path modeling is one of the software available now, or one of the techniques available now that can easily measure the mediating effect or the indirect effect of a particular variable on the relationship between an exogenous and endogenous variable. Okay, so I want to compare this one with my previous paper simply because if you will be looking the first framework, the framework was quite simple, having 3 variables, but this time I have a more complex variable. I have a more complex model, and both were measured using the PLS path modeling technique. Okay, So I think that is one of the strengths of PLS path modeling as a technique, okay, in doing an academic research. Okay. Another thing that I want to share with everyone, particularly those students who are taking DBA, is the use of mediation and moderation analysis. Moderation and mediation analysis can easily be measured using PLS path modeling. Of course, we can also use the first generation statistical test, particularly in measuring mediation. But in PLS-SEM, of course, based on my experience, it is much easier for me to measure mediation and moderation analysis using path modeling. Particularly, right now, I am using the WARP PLS software. Okay, so just to give you the idea of the difference between mediation and moderation analysis. When we talk about mediation analysis, of course, we are talking about here the use of a mediator. So in a mediator is a variable that causes mediation in the dependent and independent variable. In other words, a mediator is a variable or an intervening variable that can affect, okay, the relationship between your dependent and independent variable. So in this case, we want to know whether employee engagement intervenes on the relationship between job satisfaction and affective commitments. In mediation analysis, in order for us to identify whether a particular variable can be considered or can be treated as a mediator, is we need to satisfy one requirement. And one requirement is basically we need to establish that path A, this path, and path B, okay, can exist in reality. So what do I mean with that one? In this example, we see, or in this framework, we can see that employee engagement was utilized as a mediator. Okay, so our mediator here is employee engagement. And we have here our job satisfaction. Let's say it is represented by X, and our affective commitment represented by Y. So in order for us to say that employee engagement can act or can be treated as a mediator, we need to establish that job satisfaction and employee engagement is a possible relationship, and at the same time, employee engagement and affective commitment is also a possible relationship. Of course, how do we establish that one? Of course, the ECS is to look for prior studies and try to justify that this path A and path B are both possible relationships. Okay, and once we establish that, then we can measure now that employee engagement can be treated as a mediator in that case. Okay, this is an example of a mediation analysis, the one that I presented a while ago. So in this paper, I utilized employee engagement as a mediator or an intervening variable or an indirect variable on the relationship between transformational leadership and intention to quit. Okay. We also have what we call the use of moderation analysis. So when we talk about moderation analysis, this is through the use of what we call a moderator. So a moderator is a qualitative or a quantitative variable that affects the strength or the direction of the relationship between an independent variable and a dependent variable. A moderator, if we will be comparing it with a mediator, okay, a moderator is an interaction variable. So when we say interaction variable, it can affect the strength of the relationship between your independent and dependent variable, or your X and Y in this case. Okay, so if our moderator here is, for example, sex, and let's say sex will be measured by male and female here, then if we want to know whether the sex of the respondents can affect the strength of the relationship between job satisfaction and organizational commitment, then sex can be used as a moderator. Okay, so there are different, of course, in order for us to know whether a particular construct or a particular variable can be treated as a moderator, if you still remember a while ago, I said that a mediator, for example, the one that I mentioned, which is employee engagement, can be treated as a mediator if you will be able to establish path A and path B. Okay, but if a particular variable did not pass, okay, that requirement, then that variable is a moderator. Okay, so that is the difference between a moderator and a mediator. So just a quick recap, a mediator is an intervening variable, so it measures indirect effects. A moderator is an interaction variable. When we say interaction variable, it means it can affect the strength or the direction of your independent and dependent variable. Okay, so that's the difference between a mediator and a moderator. Okay, under moderation analysis, there are two basic types. We have what we call simple moderation, and we have the MGA. Okay, so what is MGA? MGA means multi-group analysis. Okay, so let's try to differentiate the two, because I think it is quite helpful to students to really know the difference between the two and how you will go about. Assuming, let's say, your paper or your research has something to do with moderation analysis. In a simple moderation, we assume that the interaction effect for this is an interaction effect for continuous and scale variable. So what does it mean? So let's assume that we have this simple framework. Let's say we have food safety training, okay, and we have food safety practices. And let's say that food safety knowledge, this is food safety knowledge. Food safety knowledge and food safety practices are measured using a scale, okay? And we want to know whether the number of training in terms of food safety of the respondents can affect the strength of the relationship between our food safety knowledge and food safety practices. Okay, so you will see here in simple moderation, food safety training, which is measured by the number of training. So for example, let's see if we will be distributing our data, if we will be distributing our questionnaire, then we will be asking our participants on the number of training they have attended, for example, in the last 6 months. Okay, and let's assume our participants are fast food workers or fast food employees. And we want to know whether the number of training that they have attended in terms of food safety can affect, okay, the relationship between food safety knowledge and food safety practices. Okay, so in this case, you will see food safety knowledge and food safety practices are scale variables, while our food safety training, which is measured by the number of training attended by the respondents, is a continuous variable. So if your moderator is a continuous variable, then a simple moderation can be utilized, okay, as a technique in moderation analysis. On the other hand, okay, we have what we call multi-group analysis. For multi-group analysis, the moderator should be a categorical variable. So for example, in this case, we have again our food safety knowledge and food safety practices, and we want to know whether sex, like for example, measurement, whether they are male or female, can affect the strength of the relationship between food safety knowledge and food safety practices. Then you will see here, sex here, which is measured by male and female, is a categorical variable. So if your moderator is a categorical variable, then you can use multi-group analysis, or what we call MGA. Okay, if you will be looking MGA, it is like test of significant difference. Okay, in first generation statistical tests, we try to identify now whether there is a significant difference in terms of the impact of food safety knowledge on food safety practices between male and female respondents. Okay, and we can utilize that using what we call a technique multi-group analysis, or what we call MGA. Okay, so these are the two basic types of what we call moderation analysis. Okay, so the approach on simple or multi-group analysis depends on what type of moderators you have. If your moderator is a continuous variable, then you can use simple moderation, while if your variable is a categorical variable, such as sex here, then you can use multi-group analysis as a technique. Okay. So let's have an example. So this is an example of a study that utilized simple moderation. So this study was published in British Food Journal in 2021, actually this year, early this year. So this was written by some colleagues in one university in the Philippines. These are the authors. So we did a study on food safety knowledge, attitude, practices, training of fast food restaurant food handlers, and we use moderation analysis. Particularly, we use simple moderation. And if you will be reading this paper, Okay, if you will be reading this paper, this is the framework of the study. So it has 4 major variables. We have food safety knowledge, attitude towards food safety, and food safety practices. Okay, so these 3 variables here, they were measured using scale. Okay, so they were measured using scale, while food safety training is a continuous variable. So we asked the participants or the respondents of how many trainings they have attended in the last 6 months. And we tried to measure whether the number of food safety training can moderate or has a moderating effect or interaction effect for each of the arrows here. Okay, so each of the arrows here represent a particular relationship, and we want to know whether the number of food safety training that the participants have attended can really affect those 3 relationships here. So this is an example of a study that utilized simple moderation. Okay. Then for multi-group analysis, I did a study in 2019 on the interrelationships of social media use, brand equity, and revisit intention, the case of Angeles City and City of San Fernando, Pampanga. These are the 2 major cities in our province, which is the province of Pampanga. So this paper was funded by the Department of Tourism, the Philippine Department of Tourism. So I was able to secure a funding from them. So they commissioned me to do a research on brand management, particularly on the use of social media. Okay. And they want to compare, the case of Angeles City and City of San Fernando. As I mentioned, these are the 2 major cities in our province, and they are basically attracting a lot of tourists, both local and foreign. Okay, so I did a study with this one, and the approach that I use is a multi-group analysis, or MGA. Okay. So if you will be looking at this paper, this is the proposed model or the framework of the study. It has something to do with social media use, brand awareness, brand image, word of mouth marketing, electronic word of mouth marketing, and revisit intention. Okay, so this is the proposed model of the study. And what I did in this case, or in this research undertaking, I employed multi-group analysis. So I use multi-group analysis, and I try to compare. I try to compare the responses of the respondents from Angeles City and City of San Fernando based on the different hypothesized relationships. Okay, so in this case, I use, as I mentioned, a multi-group analysis because I have a categorical variable as my moderator, which is Angeles City and City of San Fernando. Okay. Another important thing that I want to discuss, which is I think very relevant when we talk about path modeling, is the difference between first order and second order constructs. Of course, just to give you a very simple explanation of the two, when we talk about first order construct, or also called as lower order construct, it means the construct itself is a unidimensional construct. While if it is a second order construct or a higher order construct, then it is a multidimensional construct. So what does it mean? So let's have an example. So assuming, let's say we have this framework, okay? So in this framework, you will see we have 3 major variables or constructs here. We have public service motivation, organizational citizenship behavior, and organizational performance. And in this case, public service motivation, it has 4 dimensions. We have attraction to policymaking, commitment to public interest, compassion, and self-sacrifice. So based on the literature, these are the 4 dimensions of public service motivation. And a literature also says that in public organization, organizational performance can be measured based on the 3 dimensions: efficiency, effectiveness, and fairness. Okay, so in this case, you will see there are 3 major constructs: public service motivation and organizational citizenship behavior are both considered what we call second order construct, okay, or what we call higher order construct, because they are multidimensional. So here, public service motivation having 4 dimensions and organizational performance having 3 dimensions, they are what we call second order or higher order constructs. While organizational citizenship behavior was considered here as a unidimensional construct. Okay, so what is the importance of this one? Okay, why do we need to identify whether our construct is a first order construct or a lower order construct and second order construct or higher order construct? Okay, let me just present another framework. So this is the first framework that I presented. Let's try to tweak, okay, or manipulate a little of this framework. So let's assume that our framework will be like this. Okay, so still I have the same variable: public service motivation, organizational citizenship behavior, and organizational performance. But you will see here this time organizational performance was treated based on the dimensions. So we have here efficiency, effectiveness, and fairness. Okay, so instead of treating organizational performance as a second order construct or a higher order construct, then we treated the dimension as a first order construct or a lower order construct. Okay, so in this case, you will see that public service motivation, so public service motivation or PSM is a higher order construct or second order construct, while organizational citizenship behavior, efficiency, effectiveness, and fairness are considered lower order construct or first order construct. Okay, so you will see we utilize almost the same constructs in the two examples, but the treatment are different. Okay, so why do we need to consider or why do we need to identify whether it is first order or second order construct? Okay, so let me give you an example first. In this paper, this is a paper that I did with my colleague, Dr. Tongkab. She's also a faculty member in our school. So we did a study on the influence on brand experience, on brand loyalty among mobile phone users in Pampanga, Philippines. We use also mediation analysis. Okay, and in this case, all our variables were treated as first order construct or lower order construct. Okay, so if you will be looking at the framework of the study or the conceptual framework, so we have 4 variables here: brand experience, brand satisfaction, brand loyalty, and brand trust. And all these 4 variables were first order or lower order construct. Okay, so the treatment of the 4 constructs here were first order or lower order construct. Okay. In this case, so currently I am doing a study with my colleague in one university in the Philippines also. So we are doing a study on the effects of experiential quality on experiential loyalty, evidence from Starbucks coffee chains in Pampanga, Philippines. Okay, so in this case, we use one construct which is considered second order or higher order construct. Okay, so if you will be looking at the framework of this study, so this is the framework. So experiential quality, having 4 dimensions: interaction quality, physical environment quality, outcome quality, and affective quality. These are the 4 dimensions of experiential quality. Experiential quality was treated as a second order construct or a higher order construct. Then the rest of the constructs, such as experiential satisfaction, perceived value, experiential trust, and experiential loyalty were all first order construct. Okay, so you will see here 2 papers, but the approach are different in terms of the treatment of the construct. Okay, so why do we need to measure? Okay, why do we need to identify properly our constructs, whether they will be treated as first order or second order construct? So for example, this one. So this paper, as I mentioned, okay, this paper utilized second order construct and at the same time first order construct. So typically, in order for us to properly establish internal consistency and validity of our constructs, then we need to properly measure also our constructs. So for example, in this case, all our constructs here, reflective, first order, they were measured, or the different level of reliability through the use of composite reliability and Cronbach's alpha were measured. And at the same time, average variance extracted and factor loading were also measured. Okay. So in this case, you will see the typical requirement for PLS path modeling, which is evaluation of the measurement model. So typically in the evaluation of the measurement model, we identify the reliability and the validity of the constructs. Okay, so those things were also established in this paper as shown in this presentation or in this slide. Okay, and at the same time, you will see discriminant validity was also tested using two approaches, Forner-Larker criterion and the HTMT ratios. Okay, so these are the two parameters now, or the two measures when we talk about the, establishing discriminant validity of our constructs. Okay, and of course, since we utilized higher order or second order construct, we also need to establish the validity of our higher order construct. So we mentioned in this case, or in this example, we utilize experiential quality as a higher order or second order constructs containing 4 dimensions. So we measured the convergent validity by looking, number 1, the significance of the factor weight. Number 2, we also measure the level of collinearity through the use of variance inflation factor, and we also measure full collinearity VIF. Okay, so full collinearity VIF is a measure now of common method bias. Okay, so common method bias using full collinearity VIF, as suggested by Professor Nedcock, was also utilized in this case. Okay, so what does it mean? Even your assuming, let's say, you will be using higher order construct or a second order construct, you need to establish also their level of validity. Okay, and their level of validity include measurement, of course, of convergent validity, collinearity assessments. Okay. Another thing that I want to emphasize here is the use of reflective and formative construct. Based on my experience in teaching dissertation and research methods for the graduate school, I think this is one of the things that sometimes students tend to neglect. Because if, for example, if you will be using path modeling, it is very important also to identify whether your construct is a reflective construct or a formative construct. Just to run through the difference between the two. Okay, so I provided here an example given by Albers in 2010 on the difference between reflective and formative construct. Of course, the main difference is on the level of correlation among the indicators or the indicators or the items. So if your construct is a reflective construct, it is characterized by highly correlated items. Whereas when we talk about formative construct, of course, a formative construct is characterized by not highly correlated items. So let's have an example. Let's assume we have a construct satisfaction, and let's say in the first example here we have 3 items. Okay, so we have item number 1, item number 2, and item number 3, or indicator 1, 2, and 3. Okay, and let's assume that satisfaction here is measured reflectively. Okay, so let's try to assess or evaluate each of the items. So the first item has something to do with I feel well in this hotel. The second item, I'm always happy to stay in this hotel. Okay, and number 3, I recommend this hotel to others. Okay, so if you will be looking, by simply looking at the items here, you will see that the items are highly correlated. They are almost similar or almost the same. Okay, so if the items are highly correlated, then the construct is what we call a reflective construct. On the other hand, if, for example, let's say in this example, we have satisfaction also, but this time the items or the indicators are different. Okay, so we have here item number 1, the service is good, so it talks about service. Number 2, the personnel are friendly, it talks about personnel. And number 3, the room is well equipped, so it talks about the room. So you will see here each of the item. Basically, the items here are not highly correlated because they talk differently, okay, or they describe different things. The first item talks about service of the hotel. The second item talks about personnel, and number 3 about room. So what does it mean? So if I am the respondent, for example, in this questionnaire or in this survey, my answer in number 1 may be different from number 2 and different from number 3 depending on my experience. It can be that I have a good experience with the service, but I have bad experience with the personnel. And I have, let's say, average experience about the room. So you will see here, the items are not highly correlated. They are not actually the same because they measure different, each of the indicator measure different things. Therefore, satisfaction here was treated as a formative construct. Okay, so why do I need to emphasize the difference between a reflective and formative construct? Because if we will be measuring the measurement model or evaluating the measurement model, the way we measure reflective construct is different from the way we measure formative construct. So when we talk about reflective construct, if your construct is reflective, then we need to establish 3 things. Number 1, internal consistency. Number 2, convergent validity. And number 3, discriminant validity. Most of the constructs available in literature are usually reflective, but there are also cases wherein constructs are formative. So if the construct is a reflective construct, then we need to establish internal consistency by measuring, for example, the typical measurement of internal consistency. We have Cronbach's alpha and composite reliability. For convergent validity, we usually measure the factor loading and the average variance extracted. And for discriminant validity, the typical measurement include Forner-Larker criterion and the HTMT or the heterotrait monotrait ratio of correlations. Okay, so these are the 3 requirements when we talk about the measurement model. On the other hand, if your construct is a formative construct, we need to establish also 3 things. 1, convergent validity, but this time we will be using redundancy analysis. Number 2, we have collinearity, which can be measured using variance inflation factor. And number 3, using outer weight and significance by looking at the different factor weights and their corresponding p-value. Okay, so you will see here, if a construct is reflective, then we need to make use of these 3 as a measurement or as a way to evaluate the measurement model. While if your construct is a formative construct, then we use these 3, okay, as a way to evaluate our measurement model. Okay. So this is just an example of a study that utilized reflective construct. So one study, the influence of corporate social responsibility on brand loyalty and the mediating effects of brand satisfaction and perceived quality, which was published actually this year at IGEM, managed by UPM, okay, co-authored with our colleagues from Malaysia. So we did a study where all the variables were treated as a reflective construct. So we report the typical way of evaluating the measurement model, such as the use of reliability. So here we reflected composite reliability and Cronbach's alpha. Then for convergent validity, we assess the indicator loading or the factor loading and the average variance extracted. Okay. Then for discriminant validity, we use Forner-Larker to measure the discriminant validity. Okay, and also we use HTMT ratio, okay, to measure discriminant validity. Okay, so those are the typical requirements for reflective construct. On the other hand, if your construct is a formative construct, so we also did a study where we utilize constructs that are formative. So the one that I also shown a while ago on food safety knowledge, attitude, and practices and training, all constructs here were treated as formative constructs. Okay, and in a formative construct, as I mentioned, I think this is one of the differences when we talk about formative and reflective in terms of the items. If you will be looking at a formative construct, one of the requirements for formative construct is the presence of what we call a global item. A global item is the last item, typically the last item in measuring a particular construct, a particular formative construct, and it measured the overall idea about the construct. So for example here, it measures food safety knowledge, Okay, I'm sorry, knowledge in food safety, and the overall, the global item is overall I have a good knowledge about food safety. Okay, so that is one of the unique characteristic of a formative construct, the presence of what we call a global item. And the purpose of a global item is basically to use it for convergent validity using redundancy analysis. So as suggested by Ali et al. And here et al., the redundancy analysis requirement, the correlation should be greater than 0.7. So you need to correlate for example, food safety knowledge, the 17 items of the formative construct food safety knowledge with the global item. Okay, so that is how we perform convergent validity using redundancy analysis for formative construct. Okay. Then this table shows the measure of collinearity, which is use of VIF. Then we also have the measure of outer weight and their corresponding significance. Okay, so these are the three things that are required every time we use formative construct. Okay. So these are some of the studies that I've published with the use of PLS path modeling. So for example, this one, this has something to do with the interrelationships of economic experiential value, emotions, satisfaction, loyalty, and intention to recommend evidence from attendees of Angeles City Sisig Fiesta. One of our mandates in our college is to create or to publish research papers that are relevant in the tourism sector of Angeles City because our school is funded by the local government of Angeles City. So one of our ways or one of our research agenda, or part of our research agenda is to come up with research studies that really promote our city, which is Angeles City. So one of the papers that I did in 2020 was this one, and this is also through the use of what we call PLS path modeling. Okay, so this is the framework of the study. Then I did also a study on the effects of food-related motivation, local food involvement, and food satisfaction on destination loyalty, the case of Angeles City, Philippines. This is also a study a study that promotes Angeles City as a food destination. So I did a study in 2019 about it, and it was published at Advances in Hospitality and Tourism Research. Okay, so this is also a study that utilized PLS path modeling. Okay, and of course, some other papers like this one, the one that I shown to you, which was co-written by Dr. Cham and Professor Lim of UPM. So this is a study about brand, CSR, corporate social responsibility, and perceived quality. And of course, some of the papers, recent papers like this one, it has something to do with organizational behavior. It talks about the intervening effect of organizational engagement on the relationship between supportive work environment and employee retention. And others, like for example, this one, it has something to do with CSR and electronic word of mouth and the intervening role of consumer company identification and satisfaction. So this one has something to do with CSR and electronic word of mouth via consumer company identification, or CCI, and satisfaction. And this is a paper on the telecom industry. Okay, in the I think not telecom, but television, TV networks in the Philippines. Okay, so those are some of my published papers that utilize path modeling. So before I end my presentation, I would like to share this quote by Alvin Toffler. By instructing students how to learn, unlearn, and relearn, a powerful new dimension can be added to education. Okay. So thank you very much for giving me time to share my humble knowledge when we talk when it comes to research, and my humble knowledge when we talk about path modeling. Again, thank you very much. So these are my details. So if you want to send me email for queries or some comments, you can email me in my personal email and my institutional email. You can also connect with me via my LinkedIn account. So you can search my outputs on my ResearchGate, my Google Scholar, my ORCID number, my Scopus, and Web of Science ID. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the full of information for the past at least. Right? So you have shared the numbers of things, especially to show the highlights of the importance of using or the application side of and to enhance the understanding on PLS, especially application on what is for example, moderation, mediation, and a lot more the other information, which is very important actually for their next stage, not only just for this particular class, for the next stage of when they do their research later, to embark on this journey, to know what sort of methodology that's suitable, to know how to go ahead with doing that if they involve in this type of research and so on. And certainly they also been they have also been exposed to smart PLS actually, but certainly there are other software to do the estimation, like that you mentioned just now, like WAP, Amos also doing that analysis, and if I'm not mistaken, there's another one called Andego, is it?
Yeah.
Second, that doing the analysis of PLS, but certainly one of the most famous one today is the smart PLS because of the developer itself and the promotion itself and so on, and being widely used all over the world today. I would say that not just for the business research, but those related that doing this type of the questionnaire types of research. This is one of the journey that can embark, and also R Studio right now be able to embark also the estimation of PLS. So there's a lot of more of a development of an interesting thing about the PLS. So anyhow, so let me is there any question that anyone want to ask, or anything that you can if you have any question, you can ask Dr. Jean here, or you can unmute yourself, especially the class. Any question from anyone, please? Anyone want to provide any question?
I think Nuzul can do first, because Nuzul, as I said, Doctor,
yeah.
Dr. Jean, it was a very, very good sharing session, and then it's a very informative and easy to digest session. Thank you very much for that particular session. But and as I say again, salamat again lah. That is basically the only word I know. Thank you very much. Where is it? Where is my video? My video was sorry. It was off. Right. So basically, we are learning on the research, and we are learning on the analysis. Right. So I think I will ask our other teams, our other batch to ask you on the scientific question. I really want to engage a bit later in the research that you are doing, whereas you really focus on engagement, you really focus on satisfaction, and you really focus in tourism. So maybe I will bring it to a later part when we have our discussion, because on all the things that you presented just now, I think Mr. Nuzul will have some question.
Right.
Okay.
Right, Nuzul, any question from you?
Yeah. Hi, Dr. Jean. As a student, we try to absorb as much, but we are not. You have a very vast practical knowledge about research, and I would really want to have like a thumb rule. How do we differentiate plssem and cbsem? I've always been reading a lot of articles, but I still cannot get it. Can you just tell us, maybe not from the theoretical sense, maybe from the practical sense, what's the difference between plssem and cbsem?
Yeah, I think this is also one of the questions that is usually raised every time I discuss about structural equation modeling. CBSEM and PLS-SEM are basically structural equation modeling techniques. Okay, they are if you will be looking at the usage or the utilization, of course, CBSEM, okay, was first introduced, while PLSSEM is the newer one, which is continuously developing. Of course, if you will be looking at the difference, these two techniques are quite, because these are two schools of thought also. There are professors who really want to use the traditional CBSEM, but of course we have the more progressive one who wants to use PLSSEM, and I am one of those people who subscribe to that school of thought. Okay, but if you will be looking, the main difference, okay, the main difference is on what type of research you will be doing. Okay, if you will be looking some literature, the most I think the main difference between CBSEM and PLSSEM is on the goal of your study. So if the goal of your study is basically theory testing, theory confirmation, typically they will require you to make use of CBSEM, because they will tell you that CBSEM is more robust in terms of theory testing and theory confirmation. While if your study has something to do with prediction, you want to identify key drivers, then you make use of what we call PLSSEM. There are certain cases that you can use both, actually, CBSEM and PLSSEM. Okay, as I presented in one of my slides a while ago, a table that summarizes which technique is recommended or is more appropriate for a particular goal or analysis. So let's have, for example, let's say if your study has something to do with the use of for example, reflective constructs. If, for example, your study has your measurement of your construct is reflective, then you can use actually CBSEM and PLSSEM. Okay, so I think one of the things that you really need to know about these two is try to identify really of what's the goal, what is the level of measurement, in order for you to identify properly which of the technique you will be using. Is it CBSEM or PLSSEM? Okay, of course, it depends again with what is the goal of your study. Okay, I always tell my students, for example, your research will always be based on the goal of your study. Okay, and the utilization of a technique, for example, the use of structural equation modeling is only a tool for you to properly provide the results, a sound results, and a robust conclusion. So I think that's the main difference between CBSEM and PLSSEM.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Jin. Thank you.
It's okay. I guess that from that perspective, I think a lot more right now. Not to say a lot more. I guess the revolution right now are more towards the PLSSEM. Not to say that the CBSEM are not being adopted. It's just that perhaps this side of the world, this side of the world, I would say that this side of the world, maybe especially here in Malaysia,
yeah,
and maybe perhaps on the Philippines side too, and some of the Southeast Asian country, the Indonesia also, the application are mostly towards the PLSSEM. Not to say none of them do CBSEM.
Yeah,
yeah, and that's the direction here. Certainly from that perspective, to make the thing, if it's in the research, not just for the publication, perhaps you can explore both. But from the different perspective, certainly from the different perspective has just been mentioned just now, right? So, any more question? Can take a few more questions before we go off for Dr. Jin here and the rest. So, anyone want to ask any question? Yeah, it's only one. Or any comments or anything that perhaps be useful for your research, useful for this class, or you can give some example other than Nuzul. Awang, seems like
yeah. This is why I was saying just now. I want all the what you call the technical the things about which is not actually my. I say we got Mr. Nuzul, we got Mr. Kelvin, which is quite well versed, and then I know what type of question that can be asked for Dr. Jin because of to take the opportunity to ask Dr. Jin. So that is why I'm reserving my question, which is basically out of the topic actually today, Dr. Ivan. So if ever is there any other technical topic, technical question that related to the presentation just now, let others to ask first. But if there is not, I wish to ask something which is a bit out of the things that Dr. Jin is presenting, but more on the one that the paper that you have done, you have shared with us. If there is no other, then I go in lah. I want to ask a bit of out of topic.
I think you can roll in because although you say it's not related, but actually it's related to one of his research, so means that it's related in that sense. Perhaps from that perspective, right? You can share some of your perspective, and maybe Dr. Jin might have a different perspective in that sense. So just share. I think.
Right, Dr. Jin, I'm actually a board member to Tourism Malaysia, which is actually a government agency overlooking our tourism industry here in Malaysia. And then you have mentioned in a lot of your research paper that you have been analyzing, you have been researching about all this engagement, analyzing all this satisfaction. And then there is some of the paper that you highlighted just now is actually on about tourism in Pampanga. I think you mentioned Angeles in another city, and then it was done in 2019, and then you have also analyzed on what we call the mediator effect, mediator, the moderator of this particular tourism things. Maybe you can share what is the things that you have, what you call, based on your research, something that related. As I say, doctor, I'm sorry, it's off topic a bit, but I just really, since that you have been doing this, maybe you can share some of the things that you have analyzed, and then do you think there is a lot of differences due to the pandemic that have caused the pandemic that we are suffering at this particular moment, since that your research was done in 2019? Maybe you can just share a bit the one that you had the outcome with us.
Yeah. Actually, those papers that I presented, like for example, the one that talks about social media use, brand equity between Angeles City and City of San Fernando, they were done, I think, in 2019. Most of the papers that were published in 2020, they were done, of course, before the pandemic. And one of the reasons, as I mentioned, one of my motivations is basically to help the tourism industry here in our province, particularly in my city, Angeles City. Okay, because I think if we will be comparing the performance of our city compared with other cities in the Philippines, the level of tourist arrival is quite low, even though we have an international airport in our city. That's the reason we are quite eager, okay, in improving the tourism sector in our province. But of course, today, because of this pandemic, we have less tourists now. Actually, what we are doing is I did a study with my students only this year about the use of virtual tours. Okay, the utilization of virtual tours as an alternative now because of this pandemic. We tried to measure whether there's a propensity for the tourists to take advantage of virtual tours instead of the typical tour that we know, just to boost the tourism also. Because what we want to establish is, of course, once the pandemic's over, or once the situation is already okay, then most likely there will be influx of tourists again. But what we want to prove here is virtual tours or virtual tourism in general can be a bridge between the pre-pandemic and the post-pandemic. It means virtual tourism can be a good way or a good strategy for any destination, for that matter, so that they will have a certain form of attachment or a bond with the destination, despite the fact that they cannot physically go to that destination as of the moment. So we explored on that one. Actually, we just finished writing the paper a few months ago, so we are finalizing it. So most probably, if the paper will be available, I can also freely share with you you the results of that. Yeah, these are the things that I am currently doing also. Of course, I think Malaysia were also badly hit in terms of the tourism industry. Same also here in the Philippines. Most of our tourism establishments, attractions are closed. Yeah, we still have strict protocols here in the Philippines. That's the reason we try to help the tourism sector through the publication of research. Same is true with the different policymakers of the Philippines. They are also asking the academe, okay, researchers from the academe to do research on how we can improve the tourism now while we are in the situation of the present pandemic. Today, the roadmap of the Philippines is promoting domestic tourism for domestic travelers. So they try to promote destinations where, for example, if I am from Pampanga, they are promoting now, for example, another province like Cebu, so that people from Pampanga can travel to Cebu. Of course, with still the implementation of some protocols, but right now the number of cases is quite quite declining now here in the Philippines. So there are somewhat less restriction in terms of mobility, but still the number of people who are traveling from one destination is still limited. So these are the things that are currently happening, and personally we are trying to bridge the gap and help the tourism sector through research. So as I mentioned, yeah, the recent papers that I done is basically about virtual tourism.
Really excited to read the paper so that I can learn both research and analysis and also learn a bit more on tourism. So really excited the paper that you have the paper, Doctor. No? So we have the same problem actually, that we are focusing on local tourism right now. But local tourism also have their own disadvantages. Your side, there you got 100 million population, so it can support the what you call the economy, because there's the population is quite big. Malaysia-wise, one is only 32 million. So we are really hoping that we can open the border as soon as possible. As I said again, Doctor, really what you call excited to read your new paper on the latest thing that you are researching. All right, thank you again, Doctor.
All right, that's a very good question and response. Certainly, the part of virtual tourism and so-called this is not just for this pandemic. I would see that it's one of the alternative for the future too. And what are we doing right now is also virtual in that sense. So this is also the future actually, not just temporary for this pandemic. This will be so-called an alternative and an option for us to have an engagement, rather than in the sense we be able to travel into that particular place. Like for example, this morning, half of us are actually in Philippines and half of us are actually in Malaysia in that sense. So to travel virtually without going there, and that is something really new for us 2 years back, but now it doesn't seem to be new anymore. It seems to be a norm and it's going to be moving forward. So for me, this is not just a temporary measure, but it's going to be an alternative. Not just go beyond the bridge, and can be an alternative for tourism, not just for tourism, for any of the industry that involved in education and so on. So it's been doing well. So without this kind of technology around, we'd not be able to do this like what we meet right now, And to tell you the truth, Dr. Jin, I have not met all of them. 19. We have 19 here in this class, the DBA student. I have not met them face to face yet until today, because we still conducting our class online since last year. So I've not met them actually face to face. I met some, but not for the class purposes. But for the class purposes, I've not met them face to face. So this the interesting part of going forward. The knowledge education not stop. It doesn't stop there, but it will enhance more, actually, supposedly, what we are doing here virtually or face-to-face in the future, or hybrid in the future. So it's a lot more these terms going in, hybrid tourism, perhaps, or something like that. So yeah, and any last question before we let him go? This is already 12:10. I promised him 1 hour, but it's a little bit more. Is it okay for you, Jin? Thank you very much. Anyway,
Dr. Ivan, me, Kelvin here.
oh, Kevin, yes, Kevin, yes. Go ahead.
Hi, Dr. Jin. Thank you for sharing with us the directions and also the new frameworks that are going toward to this type of a survey that in the research field. But I just would like to ask more regarding more in the neuroscience to hybrid into these reflections from the consumer's perspective in this business research. So what is your opinion toward these new technologies that to study more about the consumer behaviors? Because in my, I plan to propose to merge these research tools. One is through the conventional questioning, and then another is through the neuroscience technologies by using the EEG study. Yeah.
Yeah, I think with your question, actually it has something to do with the approach. In doing a study, there's no limitations on how you're going to quote collect data. Okay, whether you will be doing a survey type, or maybe you're going to make use of some advanced technology like the use of neural assessments or neural images, for example. Then there's, I think no one is stopping somebody to do to gather data on that aspect. What is more important in doing research, aside from the technicalities of it, is for you to come up with a robust result that will yield a sound conclusion. Okay. At the end of the day, one must realize that one of our reasons why we are doing research, of course, it is a requirement of the university. But beyond the requirement of the university, we need to consider the concept of what we call added value or adding value. So we really need to add value, okay, to our respective field, and we can only add value by contributing something through research. Of course, there are some cases that some students think that doing research should involve, for example, some different forms or technical forms of gathering data in order for you to project that your data were collected in a more scientific manner. But at the end of the day, as I always tell my students, it is all about robust results and sound conclusions. Okay, because your robust results will yield sound conclusion, and this sound conclusion can really contribute to the body of knowledge. So I think that is one of the things that we always bear in mind as a researcher.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you very much. I guess we will stop here for today. I think the last thing that we should do right now is that can I have everyone to on their camera? We going to take a nice big group photo, hopefully everyone. Can you on your, let me change my view a bit so that I can see everyone. Right. We have 2 pages here, no problem. But yeah, those of you with camera, please on the camera just for a while, for just a few seconds, and then you can go back to what you know, on your camera, and then we'll take some nice picture. I'm sure that everyone, I think, yeah, like you see in the chat box, everyone have been benefited from the nice sharing from this from your sharing, Dr. Jin. Wow, almost everyone have their picture. So those of you who want to take their picture, you can take your own. If not, I will take it officially for myself. I mean, for the class, right? So let me take first page. Yeah. So just keep on smiling. 1, 2, 3. All right. This is the first page. Let me go for the second page. Let me go for the second page. 1, 2, 3. All right. Thank you very much for the speech, and let me straight away put here. All right. Thank you very much again, Dr. Jin, for the awesome sharing lecture that you give us today, and I hope we have this type of I mean more of this kind of engagement perhaps, and we're going to see each other again in the near future. Hopefully, certainly I want to go to the Philippines again. I've been there, but I want to go back to the Philippines again one day to visit and to see the awesome place I mean the Philippines. And with that, I would say thank you very much. Is there any last word perhaps from yourself, Dr. Jin, or any of the students around? Jin,
yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. And actually, same as you, I haven't seen face-to-face my students also. Okay, and at the same time, I am currently in Pampanga and my students are located in different parts of the Philippines. And the technology is basically bridging us to have a virtual meeting. But anyway, thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you for allowing my students at Polytechnic University of the Philippines to join our event today. It is a great pleasure to be sharing with you all my humble knowledge when it comes to research and statistics. And I hope I was able to share even a little to our students in UNIMAS. So again, thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. All right. All right, to the students of the Insight, I mean, for the Philippines, thank you very much for attending this session, and certainly all of you, I mean, you can remotely leave the room. Not my student yet, just a while.